Happy New Year, everyone. Yes, it's that time of year again when the planet Earth celebrates its 4,565 millionth trip around the sun, and every man and his dog in the news business give you a lazy, half-arsed recap of the year rather than produce something original. The year 2019 was insane. It began with a huge story regarding a major leak of secret documents which the prostitutes in our old, outdated UK media almost completely ignored. You'll find this to be a running theme throughout 2019. The Integrity Initiative, a government-funded charity, which in actuality is a secret worldwide propaganda network run by the UK Security Services, which spreads lies and disinformation among its own people, was shown to be up to its neck in the events surrounding the Skripal poisonings the previous year, thanks to a further batch of documents leaked by the hacking group Anonymous. What these documents showed was the rush to judgment in blaming Russia for any wrongdoing after the Skripals were poisoned the year before was scripted well in advance of the events actually happening. Just think about that. It's quite the story to start the year with. Our old media was silent on that one, as you're about to find out. Many others like it in the following months. It got quickly worse for the government's narrative on the alleged nerve agent attack when just 2 weeks later we found out that the first person on the scene was the army nurse. No, that's not a slip of the tongue either. I don't just mean any army nurse, but the army nurse. The army nurse of the army, who is trained with treating patients infected with deadly diseases and who had already been the recipient of an OBE from the Queen for her services to the state. This is the equivalent of there being an outbreak of Ebola in the middle of a sleepy town in Iowa and the first people on the scene being the real-life equivalent of the cast of the movie Outbreak. Then we found out that one of the people involved in the Orwellian Integrity Initiative product was the man responsible for the lies we were told years ago about Saddam Hussein on weapons of mass destruction. Doesn't sound dodgy at all, does it? In Parliament, things weren't going well for Theresa May, as the Prime Minister had just been handed the worst defeat in UK history for trying to pass the equivalent of a dead parrot dressed up as a Brexit agreement through the Houses of Parliament. It didn't work, but that didn't stop her trying to get it through, that same dead parrot, multiple times in the following months. Internationally, we found out from a former United Nations rapporteur that economic warfare waged by the United States in the form of sanctions were, quote, killing citizens in Venezuela. Our media didn't tell us about that. No, they had been telling us for 6 months that all the problems in Venezuela were caused by dictator Nicolas Maduro's socialist policies. Evil policies which journalist Ben Norton of the Grey Zone told me really improved ordinary Venezuelans' lives. So much for a brutal dictator. Nevertheless, this didn't stop the United Kingdom government from withholding $1.2 billion in Venezuelan gold from them, after United States President Donald Trump declared that Nicolas Maduro wasn't Venezuela's elected leader after all. US-backed stooge Juan Guaido was, even though only 18% of the Venezuelan population had even heard of the guy. But who cares if Maduro got the most votes in an election? That doesn't matter in America, so why should it matter in Venezuela, with its 297 billion barrels of oil? I'm sure that's not a factor in this brinkmanship at all. Fortunately, in the UK, we had one man who would go on to stand up to all of these lies on behalf of the good people of the United Kingdom. No, it wasn't Jeremy Corbyn. It was this guy from Derby, Chris Williamson, Labour MP for Derby North. Standing alone with very few in support, Chris had already been on Russia Today, likening the Integrity Initiative and its secretive actions to Operation Mockingbird in the United States, which installed hundreds of CIA agents in the United States media. He then went on to ask questions about Venezuela's gold in Parliament and got this response from then Defence Secretary Alan Duncan.
So can the minister explain why the double standards? Is it that he's wanting to facilitate another humanitarian catastrophe, as we're seeing in Yemen with British arms? Does he want to see the same in Venezuela? And does he not support self-determination of peoples around the world rather than intervention from Western powers?
I've got to say, I found his response an absolute disgrace.
My right honourable friend, the member for Mid Sussex, referred to Poundland Lenins. I have just seen in this House one who isn't even worth a penny, let alone a pound. I recognise when I see it, as do people on the other side of this House, unreconstructed ideological nonsense when they see it. He is a throwback, and it brings shame. Indeed, I'm astonished he's even been prepared to show his face in this House today.
I was disgusted at the time watching that response from Alan Duncan. But on reflection, and after seeing what Chris Williamson faced in the following 11 months, at least Alan Duncan stood up and confronted Chris to his face, which is more I can say for dozens of backstabbers within the Labour Party. In America, their old media, or mainstream as they like to call it, well, they were still pushing a fully debunked Russiagate theory and getting more and more ridiculous as they did. Step forward, Rachel Maddow.
This is the Director of National Intelligence telling us all in unclassified form, in black and white, China and Russia can do this today, now, whenever they want to. In other words, we're relying on their good graces that they're not. And it is like negative 50 degrees in the Dakotas right now. What would happen if Russia killed the power in Fargo today? Right? What would happen if all the natural gas lines that service Sioux Falls just poofed on the coldest day in recent memory, and it wasn't in our power whether or not to turn them back on? I mean, what would you do if you lost heat indefinitely as the act of a foreign power on the same day the temperature in your front yard matched the temperature in Antarctica? I mean, what would you and your family do?
What would you do if the power went poof in Fargo? Also, Tulsi Gabbard had announced she was running for president and was immediately smeared by their media as an Assad apologist for meeting with the president of Syria, even though Leader of the House Nancy Pelosi had done so years before. The Queen had even invited him to stop with her at Buckingham Palace. Does that make the Queen a toady? Yes, a toady. I said that because New York Times columnist Barry Weiss went on the Joe Rogan show and called Tulsi just that, an Assad toady, before demonstrating she didn't know what the word meant or even how to spell it. New York Times columnist, everybody. Meanwhile, over in France... That was the Gilets Jaunes spokesperson losing an eye. All of this was just January. I told you 2019 was an insane year. Stay tuned for part 2 of my end of year review.